AI agents are everywhere, automating tasks and making decisions at machine speed. But agents make mistakes. Just one rogue agent can do big damage before you even notice. Rubrik Agent Cloud is the only platform that helps you monitor agents, set guardrails, and rewind mistakes, so you can unleash agents, not risk. Accelerate your AI transformation at Rubrik.com. That's RUBRIK.com.
Fighting Sharia law in America. That's the topic of today's Bold and Blunt. And I'm your host, Cheryl Chumley, giving you a Christian conservative look at today's news, politics, culture, and events. Sharia law, of course, that's the particular law that Muslims adhere to through their faith. It's a blending of their faith with politics. And in most countries where it's implemented, out the window go individual liberties. Out the window goes freedom. But with the election of Zohran Mamdani to New York City's mayor, as well as the ongoing battle that we have watched play out in Texas over the Islamic Center. And there's some spots in America, right? Dearborn, Michigan, and there's some other spots in America where Muslim-type communities seem to be taking root and springing up. The question of Sharia coming to America has moved off the pages of the theoretical into the reality, the world of reality. And so what does it mean? And more importantly, how can we effectively fight it? Because anybody who knows anything about Sharia law, the number one thing that you should know is that it is not in line with the Constitution. You can't have God-given individual liberties and rights, which is what makes America exceptional, which is what the Constitution is based on protecting. And you can't have that and Sharia law. The two things just can't coexist. Before I get into more of that, I want to quickly mention, if you like Bold and Blunt, you may get Bold and Blunt at edify.app, at Real Life Network. That is the faith-based news outreach of Pastor Jack Hibbs's Calvary Chapel, Chino Hills Church in California. Real Life Network, great place to get your news from. It takes the Bible and puts it in perspective of understanding what's going on in the world of news, the culture, societies, governments, right? All from a faith-based perspective. RLN has hosted my Bold and Blunt podcast for, I don't know, a couple of years now, maybe even longer. It's been great. And as I've mentioned in previous Bold and Blunt podcasts, I will have an announcement to make soon, as soon as it's final, about the expansion of Bold and Blunt on RLN's platform. So you want to stay tuned for that. But you may also get, of course, Bold and Blunt at the Washington Times, where if you're not already subscribed to my Bold and Blunt newsletter, why not? Check it out. I want to thank those people out there who are subscribed. Really appreciate it. Really appreciate the support. And if you're interested in getting my newsletter, look, it contains all the commentaries that I write at the Washington Times, as well as my Bold and Blunt podcast, as well as my Bold and Blunt video casts. And all you have to do to get it is go to the bottom of the WashingtonTimes.com, find the newsletter section, click on it, find my newsletter, and enter your email address. And, voila, right? As they say in France, voila, you will have delivered to your email box Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, my Bold and Blunt newsletter. You may also get Bold and Blunt, the podcast, wherever podcasts are available, which, you know what, I would encourage you to go online and check out all the ratings for Bold and Blunt that you can get at Apple and Spotify and all that. A lot of people out there have said some very good things about Bold and Blunt, and obviously they are among the smartest people of the world. Right? Anybody who praises Bold and Blunt, automatic check mark in my book, and I really appreciate it. All right, let's go to, which one of these do I want to go to first? So, well, this one's shorter. So let's go to fairplanet.org. Don't ask me what that is, but it's an interesting piece they put. They talk about 3 countries where Sharia law is hardest on women. And so we're talking degrees of hardest on women, right? Because there is no there is no standard where women are treated great under Sharia. So we're talking about degrees of separation between, I don't know, being treated like a second class citizen and being treated like a mongrel, right? So it's not exactly a standard that American women would easily adapt to, right? Because, of course, we're all used to our individual freedoms. And in America, we have these far leftist nut jobs in the Democrat Party, primarily women who are radical feminists and LGBTQ supporters and pink-haired, blue-haired, multi-tattooed, pierced body types who just really go out there and wear their pink pussy hats and proclaim widely about the rights that MAGAs want to strip from them. Well, these women in America, if they think Donald Trump is bad for women, then they ought to catch a glimpse of what Sharia law would put on them. But that being said, okay, fairplanet.org, 3 countries that are hardest on women with their implementation and enforcement of Sharia law. Saudi Arabia, right? America's bestie friend next to Israel, apparently. So let's read this a little bit. In Saudi Arabia, women's lives are closely monitored and regulated through the implementation of Sharia law. Though the guy, you know what? I need to enlarge this font, right? I need. It seems like every show I lose some eye power, and I have to enlarge the fonts more and more. That being said, though the government scrapped the infamous driving ban for women in 2018 following the successes of the Women to Drive movement, think about that for a second. Think about how stuck in the past, how backward, how anti-women your country has to be for the latest movement to be entitled Women to Drive movement. All right, so that took place in 2018, and Saudi Arabia reversed the ban on women drivers in their country, and yet women aren't driving. Fair Planet goes on to write, the proportion of women on the road stood at just 2% 2 years on, according to one study. So even though they have the right to drive now, the government there has given them the right to drive. The Sharia compliant government has given women the right to drive in Saudi Arabia. Only 2% do. I wonder why. Maybe it's a reeling back of Sharia law restrictions in paper only. Maybe these women are afraid to drive because there are still many more caveats of Sharia law that are in play in Saudi that they're afraid to drive, and they're afraid that the men in their life will take advantage of the other aspects of Sharia law that have not been reeled back and force them into some other form of slavery, right? Iran, another country that is listed as top 3 bad places to be if you're a woman. They don't put it that way, but that's basically what it is. Despite their active participation in education and the workforce, Fair Planet writes, Iran's enforcement of Sharia law poses significant challenges for women. What a diplomatic way to put that, right? Significant challenges. Women are treated like mongrels, but that's a significant challenge. It's a little bit challenging. Yeah, it's a little bit challenging. As in Saudi Arabia, a male guardianship system governs women in Iran, requiring women to obtain permission to marry, divorce, get custody, inherit, and even travel abroad. And let's remember, here in America, these loser women out there are busily out in the streets with their pro-Palestine, their pro-Hamas movement, completely ignorant completely ignorant of the fact that they're fighting for their own demise of freedoms, right? All right, number three country, Afghanistan. Yeah, well, thank you, Joe Biden, right? Still go back in time, Joe Biden, President, White House, the botched withdrawal of America from Afghanistan, opening the doors for Taliban members to step up and control women's lives once again. And boy, did they. Boy, oh boy, did they. Between 2001 and 2021, Afghan women had begun to recover from a grueling Taliban rule that U.S. troops had ousted, but the Taliban swiftly snatched its power back when the United States, when Joe Biden, I'm going to caveat that, when the United States under Joe Biden withdrew its final troops in 2021 following a peace agreement with the militant group. And while Joe Biden checked his watch as American heroes' bodies were being offloaded from the airplane on U.S. soil, the situation for women and girls in Afghanistan grew dire. Fair Planet wrote. In 2 years, Afghanistan's legal system once again became deeply rooted in Islamic law. That means Sharia law, with the Taliban requiring women to be always accompanied by a male relative when outside their homes. Afghan women are severely restricted in what they can do. As a result, they face significant social and cultural barriers in participating in public life, along with severely diminished access to health care. Women are also barred from school, working outside the home, and working for NGOs. And this is what Democrat women are fighting for here in America. All right, so one of the left's, one of the Democrats, one of the liberals' response to that is that, oh, that's just a particular kind of Sharia law. That's Sharia law run amok. That's when Sharia law is being pushed by a radical, reactionary radical Muslim leader, right? Well, okay, I have an answer for that. And for that, World Population Review did this great essay, and I'm just going to run down what World Population Review wrote about the 5 classifications of Sharia law. And this is important, which I'll explain after I go through them. I can't pronounce the Islamic actual terminology, but I'll spell it out so you can look it up yourself. One classification is called FARD. I'm taking a guess. That's what it's pronounced. But it's FARD. And that's a classification of Sharia law where the actions for adherence to Sharia law are obligatory or mandatory. So these types of actions illustrate the fact that Sharia law determines the things one absolutely should do, in addition to outlining what one should not do, right? So that's one classification. The next classification is called mustahab, M-U-S-T-A-H-A-B-B. Mustahab, whatever, actions are recommended actions that aren't necessarily required, but which can be spiritually beneficial, either in this world or the next, World Population Review writes, if performed. There are thousands of mustahab acts, from a greeting to a type of charitable donation. Okay, so those are things that could be seen as good for your religious belief, but not necessary to adherence of Sharia law. Third type of action, mubah, M-U-B-A-H. Mubah actions are permitted, neutral, or indifferent. These acts are neither mandatory nor forbidden, and neither encouraged nor discouraged. They invoke no judgment, reward, or punishment from God, and this is the largest category of actions that are practiced by those those pushing Sharia law. So under Sharia law, it's the mubah actions that comprise most of the laws, right? They're neither encouraged nor discouraged. Two more, makruh, makruh. They're disliked, abhorred, and looked down upon, but not expressly forbidden. I'm still reading from World Population Review here. Though these acts are not punished, those who refrain from them will be rewarded. Makruh acts may include behaviors such as eating garlic before attending mosque, swearing, or slaughtering an animal for food in view of other animals of the same species. Don't offend the animals, right? I guess. Don't upset the animals. Last one, haram, Haram actions are forbidden or prohibited by God, usually in the Quran, and are considered sinful. Haram acts should never be performed, even if it is for an honorable cause. There are multiple points of view regarding which acts are and are not haram. Note, too, that this term should not be confused with the Arabic word haram, which means sanctuary. Okay, so I ran through the 5 classifications of Sharia law. So if you're somebody who is at the top of the chain in government, right, pushing Sharia law, you have to take into consideration these 5 classifications in how they're going to trickle down into the population, the Muslim population at large. And therein lies the problem, right? So I read through what World Population Review described as these 5 different classifications, and the common denominator of all of them is basically that they are open to interpretation, right? There are a few that are like must and must nots, but aside from that, it's all very watery. It's a watery world, just open to interpretation out there when you're talking about Sharia law. And the problem with that is that if you have a nut job in charge of implementing and enforcing Sharia law, then what can come is a Sharia law that is enforced, such as you see in Saudi Arabia, Iran, Afghanistan, right? And even if there is a much less restrictive form of Sharia law, that's probably an entire discussion for a different day, right? Can there actually be a less restrictive version of Sharia law? Different discussion, different day. But for the sake of this, let's just say, even if there is someone at the top of the chain implementing a form of Sharia law that is less restrictive, more, say, liberal or progressive, that's not to guarantee that that particular form of Sharia law in that particular community or country is going to remain liberal or progressive as time changes, as leadership changes. So here's the thing with Sharia law. You got to decide, is that something we want in America? Because when you're talking about Judeo-Christian principles, and yes, we've got the 10 Commandments, and yes, we've got a system of governance that is based on Judeo-Christian principles, that is based on mostly the Christian religion, that is based on biblical truths. At the same time, we also have a First Amendment, and we have a spirit of freedom in America that welcomes, embraces, tolerates, opens the door to all types of faith, so long as those types of faith and the faithful who carry those types of faith don't use that religion to justify circumventing the Constitution, or worse, destroying the Constitution, which is the problem with Sharia law. That right there in a nutshell. Is Sharia law compatible with the Constitution? Nope. No, it is not. My guest today has much more to say on this because he is here in part to talk about legislation that would prohibit Sharia from expanding, taking root in America. This is something that's very necessary, very, very necessary. We need to get ahead of this before it's too late. Keith Gross, I want to thank you so much for being on Bold and Blonde. It is so great to have you here.
It's great to be with you.
So let's talk about the problem of Sharia law in America. I understand that there are a few Republicans on Capitol Hill who are pushing legislation to prohibit those who adhere to Sharia law from entering America.
Yeah, there is legislation to that effect, and it really highlights the important thing that we should all be thinking about with immigration policy, and that is, who do we want to admit to our nation? A lot of people think we should admit anyone to our nation without any, criteria whatsoever, but the reality is we should only admit those who are going to contribute to and improve American society. People who subscribe to an ideology that really spans more than a religion. It's a political and legal platform, not just a religious platform. That's not compatible with Western American democracy and how we believe in individual freedom and freedom of religion.
So you touched on the pushback, right? So let's get the devil's advocate stuff out of the way right away. The religious freedom issue. You mentioned that Sharia is not solely a religious belief, but it's also political. There are people out there who would say that's not true. How do you get around the First Amendment freedom, religious freedom issues?
If anything, the First Amendment properly applied forbids Sharia law. So Sharia law, if you look at other Muslim-majority countries around the world, I believe there's over 50 Muslim-majority countries that have Sharia law. So when you look at those countries, it's not optional. If the Muslim population is in the majority and they enact Sharia law, non-Muslims are forced to follow Muslim beliefs. The way our First Amendment was drafted and intended to be applied was never to prevent people from worshiping whomever they want to worship, or no one at all if that's their choice, but to prevent the government from forcing others to follow your beliefs. And so it's a freedom of religion, it's a freedom from religion, but it is not, interestingly, as many people misunderstand, a demand that there be separation of church and state. And so there are some ways the First Amendment has been misapplied in recent decades. But at its core, religious freedom means you can't force other people to adhere to your religious beliefs, and that is exactly what Sharia law does.
So it's already here. Texas has been battling this, right, with the Muslim community centers. And there are other spots around America who are already facing Sharia law type communities that are sprouting. Why aren't Americans seeing this as a threat?
I think it's two things. One, it's relatively isolated right now. You've got massive Muslim population movements in Dearborn, Michigan, Minneapolis. As you mentioned, there's a couple in Texas now. But it's still disparate and relatively below the radar until recently. There were a couple of bills introduced by Republicans in the House that are addressing the issue. But for most Americans, it's just not a problem yet. And I think that's why people aren't taking it as seriously as they really should. The other reason is there is this massive movement, especially from the left. They call it tolerance, and they say anyone that doesn't like the idea of Muslim populations expanding, they must be Islamophobic. Well, I don't think that's necessarily true. I think that that is good marketing, and it's intended to make people feel ashamed for pushing back against the Muslim expansion when they should, in fact, be okay pushing back against that, as it is contrary to the American values and freedoms we hold dear here.
So we already have an example of how Sharia starts slowly as a slow creep and then just takes over. If we look at Europe, if we look at the United Kingdom, and I wonder if you could sort of take us through a historical walk through how quickly Sharia spread there.
Well, the events that have happened in Europe generally started with migrant policy designed to allow people in war-torn, largely Muslim countries to escape their war-torn country and migrate into Europe. There was the assumption, I suppose, that they would assimilate and contribute to the fabric of European society. In fact, what we've observed is a massive influx that is not assimilating, but rather taking over and effectively conquering European nations. And they're destroying the local culture by replacing it with their own. That just isn't a logical thing for America to allow. Why would we allow people to run away from a war-torn country and then apply their broken third world paradigms to a successful American community that welcomed them in? That is suicide by democracy, suicide by immigration policy.
It's a little bit baffling to me, and probably to many on the right, if you look at what Sharia law stands for in terms of LGBTQ, in terms of women's rights, in terms of exercising your religious freedom, that the Democrat Party would stand so staunchly in favor of allowing Sharia law into America.
It's an illogical extension of what I think the left generally starts out with as a let's champion the underdog mentality. Let's stand behind those who are perceived to be oppressed or bullied and champion those oppressed and bullied communities. I think that taken to its illogical extension, like we see with supporting Muslims that want to enact Sharia law, is exactly what I mean by suicide through migration. I mean, as a gay man, if someone calls me Islamophobic, darn right I'm Islamophobic. They would murder me if I were in their country. They would toss me off the roof of the nearest building. And to see people like Mamdani campaigning in New York City, he's now the lead candidate for mayor. He's campaigning with radical imams, an unindicted co-conspirator in the 9/11 attack. And one of the things that imam champions is heinous penalties, oppressive, barbaric responses to the gay community. So on his surface, Mamdani says he's friendly to the gays, but the imam that he chums around with would have gay men beheaded. And that same imam has preached repeatedly in his history that getting involved in the political process is part of the mission to move Islam forward. And so these people don't see it as merely they want to practice their religion in private, in peace. They want to force it on others.
You raise an interesting point about how the Democrats embrace the underdog, right? And I think that's a very American principle in itself. I think a lot of Americans, no matter their political beliefs, like the underdog to win. But for radical Islamism, for Sharia, there's a certain amount of ignorance that has to flow through that to bring about that embrace. And it can't be simply ignorance, though, or a need to embrace the underdog. There has to be something more driving this. Do you see a strategic, campaign going on here to crumble America?
I do see that it's part of a general pushback on traditional American values, and that by adopting literally any value system other than traditional American values, there are people on the left who would consider themselves to be somehow virtuous. And I think that started a long time ago with the demonization of American values. You know, they say that Christopher Columbus was a terrible person and perhaps he did some things wrong. But what they're not recognizing when they, hail this Indigenous Peoples Day as they seek to reterm Columbus Day, they're not recognizing the benefits that establishing this country has created. They say our Constitution should be ignored because it was written by people who owned slaves, but they ignore the fact that our Constitution helped end slavery, and that while our nation inherited such heinous practices from our predecessor, the British Empire, we ultimately did away with that broadly and across the globe have done away with such practices that are anti-humanitarian. And so it's a effort that's being pushed forward by those who I think want to cause a communist revolution in this nation by causing people to hate the very things that built the foundation of America.
I'm so glad you said that. That's exactly how I see it as well. And I wonder, can you point to any historical occasion where Sharia law has taken root in a community or even in a country, and it's been reeled back, it's been booted out?
I haven't seen it booted out. I've seen it take over new countries. Wasn't it Myanmar recently that was taken over by an Islamic government? And before you know it, women were forced to wear hijabs and they were beaten if they disobeyed men. I mean, talk about people that need to be Islamophobic. Any woman should be Islamophobic because they do not have good intentions for women.
Yeah, we need really only look to Afghanistan and what happened with that botched withdrawal of American troops under Joe Biden, and the women who suffered under the Taliban's.
Yeah.
Let's take a quick look in the last couple minutes at your book, Dirt Roads to Runways: Defending the American Dream for the Next Generation. What are some of the highlights from that?
It's really a tale of growing up in rural North Florida, where I grew up in a small town surrounded by people that have common sense wisdom. Most of them didn't have significant formal educations, but the common sense things that they would say are the sorts of things that still resound with me now. And if we were to apply some of these common sense principles, America would be in a much better place. Principles like ensuring that our government doesn't spend more than it takes in, understanding that government spending drives inflation, the endless handouts that we see for certain communities that don't earn very much, which have the ultimate effect of destabilizing and undermining those communities by taking away their drive to succeed and expand their own horizon. So there's a lot of stories in there that relate to things going on today. And that's really the takeaway from the whole book. We can restore America by getting back to common sense basics in government instead of having it be everything to everyone.
It's very difficult at this point in time, though, because not only do you have years and years of the socialist type infiltration into the public school systems, right? And college professors that have been, by and large, leaning far left for even longer. So you have the next generation of young leaders in America leaning socialist, leaning communist, but then you also have like you said, a rising acceptance of open socialists serving in political offices right now. So, there's no overnight solution to bring America back to its founding father principles, is there?
I don't think it can be done overnight, but I think a lot of people are recognizing Mamdani's candidacy in New York as a mask-off moment for communism. In short, McCarthy was right. They are coming for us. They are seeking to destabilize our nation. And I think this movement is being funneled funds from across the globe, from countries that are adversarial to us. We're seeing it at our border with fentanyl, for example. It's death by 1,000 cuts is what a lot of our adversaries are hoping to impose upon America. We're seeing the Chinese government actively helping drug cartels south of our border put fentanyl in our communities. That's the tip of the iceberg. I think all these protests and riots that we see that look very non-organic are being well funded by someone, and I think a lot of that someone is foreign. So we need to really look at what's going on in our country and get back to constitutional basics. We used to all agree, whether we're on the left or right, that we're a nation of laws, that we have to enforce our laws, and that we believe in the Constitution. But recently, especially in the most educated, I say educated with air quotes, communities, they don't believe in basic constitutional values anymore. They think it's okay to disregard those in the name of what they think is just and equitable.
So, Keith, let's just wrap with this last question then. If a listener right now is getting motivated to jump in, they want to fight, they want to win back America from this communist threat that looms, and the Sharia threat that looms, what 2 or 3 ideas could the average American citizen put into place right now to join this fight?
I think you have discussions with people in your friend group, in your community, even with people that disagree with you. It's important that we have discussions about things. For a long time, people have ignored politics and called it an off-topic sort of thing in polite conversation. But we need to get back to having conversations about political realities. We need to get back to discussing the constitutional foundation that made America great and how we can apply that. In short, one of the things it means right now is DEI is wrong. We don't need equal outcomes for people. We need equal opportunities for people. We need to get back to enjoying individual responsibility and the differing results that our individual freedoms can produce. Depending on your level of capability and interest, run for office if you believe in restoring the Constitution, because we need more people to run for office who believe in doing the right thing, not just in getting a job and keeping it, not in increasing their own personal wealth, but in spreading the message and restoring the American freedoms that made this country what it is.
Yeah, and sometimes just opening your mouth and voicing your opinion, you can't tell how far that influences, right? Because there's so many people who hear somebody say something and then they think, you know what, that's what I was thinking as well. And sometimes when you're on the right, or specifically in the conservative and MAGA world, you can feel like you're alone. And it's great just to have conversations like you mentioned. So Keith Gross, author of Dirt Roads to Runways, Defending the American Dream for the Next Generation. I want to thank you so much for your time. It was great chatting.
Great to be with you. Thank you.
And that's another Bold and Blunt. Remember, if you like Bold and Blunt, you may get Bold and Blunt at edify.app, at Real Life Network at WashingtonTimes.com, and of course, wherever podcasts are available. Tune in next time. And meanwhile, don't forget, stay blunt, stay bold.